Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Aiken, Chair of the Roman Roads Research Association, and welcome to tonight's talk. I'm going to do this a little slowly because we're still getting people coming in, so I don't think it matters if we're a couple of minutes late. We've got a good audience tonight. Um, Thanks for joining us again, Susan. Right. So tonight, I'm very, very pleased to be able to announce a talk by one of our own. Because Susan is one of the people you don't usually see behind the scenes on one of our talks. She's been a member for quite some time, um, and has the, I was going to say dubious honour of living very, very, very
Oh,
close to a Roman road, even if we're not
yeah.
really sure exactly where it is. And we used to think it actually went under her house, but sadly not. That's the Stain Gate up in near Hadrian's Wall. Tonight, though, she's going to be talking about sustaining cavalry capability on the northern frontier. And this is based on work that she did for a master's, it was for a master's dissertation at Newcastle, yes. And she's actually gone on from that and is now working on a PhD, also at Newcastle and funded by Northern Bridge on a similar subject. And I'm not going to read it out because it is a bit of a mouthful. Um, But do you want to sum up very quickly yourself, Susan, rather than me mangle it up?
Yeah, what I'm doing is looking at the building and running of the Castronova Fort, which was the home of the Imperial Horse Guards, and which was destroyed by Constantine when he became emperor, and he built the Lateran Basilica over the top. So I'm looking at the construction and running costs of the basilica as well, and then comparing the costs of the fort with the costs of the basilica. And just seeing what that might tell us about the imperial economies of Severus, who built the fort, and then Constantine, who built the basilica. Not personally, but basically gave the nod that that's what should happen. So there we go. That's it. That is almost as long as the actual title of the PhD.
Looking forward to it though when it's finished. But
Yeah.
tonight, you'll be focusing on the cavalry along the northern frontier, specifically
Yes.
Hadrian's Wall.
It's a bit closer to home.
Yeah. Okay. For those in the audience who are new, and if you want to put a question to Susan, then please use the chat. Type it into the chat function. Those will be relayed to me, and I'll put them to Susan at the end. The talk is being recorded, so could I ask you to make sure that you keep your videos off and remain muted throughout? And without any further ado, I think we'll make a start. So if you want to share your screen now, Susan.
Okay, thanks. Have you got that there
Yeah, it's coming.
coming through?
There we
Splendid.
go.
Right. Okay.
Right,
Click
yeah.
on there we go. Right, sorted.
Right, I'll disappear and I'll see you again shortly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to give this presentation and for your kind introduction, Mike. As you said, my talk's based on my MA in Roman Frontier Studies research at Newcastle University into the military horses of the northern frontier in the second century AD. Horses were a ubiquitous element in the Roman military and formed a significant part of the frontier forces as part of the alae, the dedicated cavalry units, and the cohortes equitatae, the part-mounted units. They contributed to Rome's military success through their action as force multipliers, providing speed, mobility, and reach. And a force multiplier has been defined as the effect produced by a capability that, when added to and employed by a combat force, significantly increases the combat potential of that force and thus enhances the probability of successful mission accomplishment. In short, a mounted soldier can move faster and cover more ground than a soldier on foot. Now, events in central Britannia during the 2nd century AD demanded a strong military presence, manifest in the construction and garrisoning of Hadrian's Wall. The size and number of cavalry formations at the western end of the Tyne-Solway Isthmus, which the wall crossed, suggests that the threats were greater in this region, At the beginning of the 2nd century AD, Carlisle, home to a 500-strong alae, was the most important Roman base in northwest Britain. And the garrison was soon reinforced in the AD 160s when a large stone fort was built north of the River Eden at Stanwix for the 1,000-strong Ala Petriana. Whether the threats were to Roman control of the region or to the wider community in the form of raids or livestock rustling, they were met with a robust military response. And sustainment of the cavalry's operational capability on the frontiers depended on a reliable supply of horses. There is evidence of the process in the east of the empire, but little elsewhere. An examination of the Tyne-Solway Isthmus can provide a good illustration of how it worked and was sustained in Roman Britain, and hence how it may have worked on other frontiers of the empire. And during this presentation, I'm going to cover the changing landscape across the isthmus and how it may have influenced the distribution of Roman forces in the region. I'll cover the different roles of the mounted units, the types of horses they used, and how they were sourced, and then go on to talk about their training and life as Roman cavalry horses. But first, I'd like to highlight how the horse and its needs can influence the environment around it. They are complex animals, but their basic needs are simple. However, these must be met if the horse is to remain healthy and, from a military viewpoint, serviceable. Their importance to the function and capabilities of the Roman military mean that it's wise to consider the impact of equine requirements on its organisation and routine. Horses need large investments of money, time, and space, then, just as now. And with horses allocated by provincial government officials to individual cavalrymen, there was a reason these men were paid more than their infantry counterparts. Not only did the horses have to be cared for, but also their harness and other equipment to be bought and maintained, in addition to the cavalryman's own kit. And many cavalrymen had grooms to assist them, who in turn had their own feed and clothing needs. As for time, the inclusion of grooms on many cavalry tombstones pays testament to their contribution, and some grooms were even given. A famous example from Rome being that of 2 grooms of a duplicarius, named Aurelius Sanctinus, of the Equites Singularis Augusti, and their memorial is shown here, complete with a poem in their honour. Now, working with horses demands close communication between horse and human, and this requires sustained regular training and willingness and aptitude in both if the training is to be successful. While it might not always be the case, strong bonds can form between riders and grooms and their horses. And I think the bond is captured quite nicely here in this small detail from part of a relief on Trajan's column. Now, according to the Roman writer Dio Cassius, when Severus disbanded the Praetorian Guard in AD 193, there was one guard who, faced with exile and the distressed neighs of his horse as it tried to follow him, turned back, and he slew first his horse and then himself, rather than face that separation. And even emperors were not immune. The bond was alluded to by the Roman poet Statius in his poem on Domitian's great equestrian statue. And when Hadrian's favourite hunting horse died, the emperor buried him in a large tomb covered with inscription. Now, horses may provide a key to understanding the extent of Roman military exploitation of the landscape across its region. The equine influence on occupied regions went beyond their military contribution, having a direct effect on their immediate environment, both natural and structural. And the building shown here is part of one of the stable barracks at Wall's End, and it has its urine pit clearly visible. The horses require around an acre of land each for grazing and exercise, and the green circles in the strip along the bottom of this slide represent the amount of grazing required by the horse population of each fort studied, from Kilbride in the west to South Shields in the east, and the land around each fort had to be able to support the horses within it. While hay and barley can be bought in or gathered in lieu of taxes from local farmers, it requires correct storage and lots of it if it's not to spoil. And the lengthy periods of grazing provide the bulk forage essential for equine digestive systems to function properly, and the action of grazing provides gentle, steady exercise. So the outdoor space also allows them to interact as a herd and express natural behaviours. If the horses did not have access to grass, the hay had to provide the necessary bulk, and the exercise requirements met through patrolling. But if horses are worked hard without access to or time for grazing, their diet must be supplemented by hard feeds such as barley, and they must have access to clean fresh water at all times, because although the moisture content of grass provides some of the horse's water requirements, it does not provide all, and a minimum of 20 litres a day is needed. So a horse with a diet largely comprising hay and hard feed is going to need a lot more. Depending on location and workload, a quingenary alae would need between 13,000 and 38,000 litres of clean, fresh water daily. So the grazing and watering needs had to be met by the fort's own territorium. And if horses were fundamental to the function and capabilities of the Roman military, the influence of their requirements on fort locations needs to be understood. At the western end of the isthmus, the mix of marsh and low-lying rough or improved pasture around Kilbride extended north to Bowness on Solway and Brockwell Sands, and south beyond Beckford, providing extensive pastures around the forts for the garrison's animals. Moving east, the Solway Plain, formed by the merge and spread of several river valleys, was ideal cavalry country. Low-lying pasture offered extensive lush grazing, and the river valleys provided clear uplands, routes that could be exploited for patrolling, control of access, and intelligence gathering. Then in the central region, poor grazing might support horses with a light workload, but the rigours of military life demand a high level of nutrition. For example, the grazing around Burdeswold, shown here, is poor, and while pottery inscribed with the name of a decurion indicates it may have housed cavalry in its early days, this might have been one of the factors that made Burdeswold an infantry garrison. At the end of the 1st century AD, Vindelander's territorium supported a military part-mounted cohort and stretched from the Tyne to the south to beyond Hadrian's Wall in the north, and 2 to 3 kilometres both east and west. Poor pasture with few nutritious or palatable plants may have been a factor here in the change of resident unit to an infantry cohort. However, evidence of reduced numbers of field voles and field mice in the Vindelander stores in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD imply an expansion of pasture, the prime hunting grounds for the barn owls that hunt them. This expansion coincided with the arrival once again of a part-mounted cohort, the 4th cohort of Gauls, and they replaced the infantry garrison, the 2nd Nervian cohort. Now, moving east, the rough moorland of the central region dropped suddenly down to a gently rolling landscape of excellent grazing around Chesters Fort. This was home to the 2nd Asturian cohort of cavalry, and it sited close to the congruence of the North and South Tyne rivers. This created a prime hub for patrolling along the adjacent valleys. These valleys are overlooked by 3 Iron Age hill forts, Gordon Hill, Wolf's Crag, and Fallowfield. The Iron Age communities that built them may have done so to monitor movement along the valleys, and the Roman military would have been quick to recognise the site's defensive and offensive potential. Further east still, the land was used for cultivation of spelt wheat and barley was the standard hard feed for Roman horses, and the low-lying land would also have provided suitable pasture as in the west. Now I suggest that these different terrains, each with a varying potential for sustaining equine populations, did influence the distribution of the mounted units across the isthmus. And the 2nd century AD pattern of military occupation here reflects this. The fully mounted units, the alae, indicated by the black horses, were located in fertile river valleys. The part-mounted units, indicated by dark brown horses for military units with around 960 horses, and light brown horses for quingenary units with around 640 horses, they occupied the low hill country, while the little green men of the infantry, with much smaller equine establishments, were based in the forts of the central region of rough upland. Now, while I'm sure the Romans took full military advantage of the terrain in these locations, equine needs may also have played their part in the selection of sites for the forts and the garrisons that subsequently occupied them. The frontiers need monitoring and protection using a mixed force of static and mobile units to garrison installations and patrol surrounding areas. The units of the Tyne-Solway Isthmus provided just such a mix and performed several roles, including patrol and reconnaissance, administrative tasks, official communications, and routine policing. The alae were based at two key locations, Carlisle and Chesters, from whence they could deliver a fast response to any major hostilities. Whereas the cohortes equitatae, they provided the localised mixed forces along the eastern and western reaches of the isthmus, and they were able to deliver a flexible response to minor incidents and incursions. Now, the troopers of a cohort equitata were not mounted infantry who dismount in order to fight, as has sometimes been suggested, but they were cavalry fighting independently of, but presumably in cooperation with, the infantry of their unit. Based on Hadrian's qualified praise in his speech to the troops at Lambaesis in North Africa, their horses and riders are often assumed to be inferior to those of the alae, and the pay differences do appear to support this. However, while their role may not have demanded the complicated battlefield manoeuvres and dash of the alae, the stealth and observation skills of patrol and reconnaissance tailored to suit local environments should not be underestimated. In the words of Lord Roberts, right in the early 20th century, of his experience scouting with cavalry in India and Afghanistan, this was an activity that tried the nerves far more seriously than any cavalry charge. And furthermore, the Batavians, who were based at Vindolanda around the turn of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, they were renowned for their horsemanship, and their ability to swim rivers fully armed with their horses marked their role as shock troops capable of unexpected tactics that could surprise and overwhelm an enemy. So with meticulous preparation and a disciplined pattern of lead, trot, and walk, fit, trained cavalry troops can cover a distance of 25 miles or 40 kilometres in under 6 hours, and 150 miles or 240 kilometres in a week. With the average distance between forts with mounted units in this region being around 15 kilometres, the patrol ranges would have overlapped, ensuring no areas were missed from surveillance. The actual distances covered, often over difficult terrain, may have been much longer. And an altar at Jedburgh, dedicated by the 1st Battalion cohort based at Castle Carey on the Antonine Wall, but also known to have had a detachment at Vindolanda, indicates there may have been regular, long-range scouting patrols at 60 miles or more. This map illustrates 3 possible 25-mile routes into the uplands north of Hadrian's Wall. The white line on the left shows the route from Stanwix, home of the Ala Petriana, and this follows the rivers Esk and Liddell. The green line from Chesters, home of the Second Asturians, follows the valley of the North Tyne. And the yellow line marks Deer Street from Corbridge, once the home of the Ala Petriana, to the fort up at High Rochester. And this was their reach in just one day, and it could be repeated to meet threats further afield, with their total reach restricted only by limits of endurance and resupply. So the cavalry horses had to be capable, covering long distances, sometimes at speed, and still be able to carry their troopers into combat at any time. Sourcing and selection had to be rigorous to guarantee horses of this calibre. And the remounts would be required on a routine basis to address normal attrition and on a surge basis to replace combat casualties. A remount rate of 10% has been calculated from the numbers given by Pseudo-Hyginus for the numbers of horses in Millery and Congeneriala in the late 1st century AD. For an estimated establishment of around 4,750 horses across the Tyne-Solway Isthmus, 475 remounts were required every year from studs within Britain or the near continent, and all would require basic training. And one of the most complete discussions of horse types in northern Britain is that of the horses of the Tremontium fort at Newstead in Scotland. 6 types were identified, ranging from small, sturdy horses of around 11 to 12 hands, similar to the Shetland, to larger horses of around 13 to 14 hands, of varying conformations, from coarse-limbed to more slender types. And Roman horse bones found at Corbridge also show variation in height and build. The 2 tibia bones on the left of the photo are longer and more robust than 3 to the right, and this may be in response to workload, as this can cause bones to remodel their structure. The study of horse heights across the northern frontier from Ribchester, home of a Sarmatian cavalry alae from AD 175, to Catterick, to Vindolanda, and then up to Tremontium, show that most were around 12 to 14 hands, with 2/3 measuring 13 to 14. Given the size of horses evident on the northern frontier, and the reliance of the cavalry on these horses to fulfil its military roles, those roles and the horses' ability to sustain the workload to meet them had to be taken into consideration in their selection. And those responsible for supplying horses to the military were the stratores, who served the provincial governor. Their title derived from stratum, the word for saddlecloth or saddle. It was a role of tremendous responsibility, but it was susceptible to abuse. And later in the 4th century, laws restricted the fee for inspecting horses to 1 solidus and prohibited payment of bribes to stratores. Now, while horses can be moved by ship, making import from the continent possible, Romans understood horses do not travel well by sea. Loading and unloading can also be a fraught task, and therefore it's probable that the bulk of horses used by the Roman military in Britain were bred here. And in looking for potential breeding sites, I searched the Rural Settlement of Roman Britain website for locations with evidence of neonatal horse remains. And this might indicate areas with large populations of young horses. The results were interesting, showing a strong presence south of and flanking the Fosse Way, with a scattered distribution along the east coast and Deer Street. These roadside settlements, with a high incidence of young horses, suggest they were hubs of horse trading and possibly even breeding. Equine bone fusion and tooth data from Ware in Hertfordshire suggests the presence of a breeding centre there. And excavations at Grove Airfield in Oxfordshire have found a high proportion of horse bones among the fallen remains, many from young stock. The banjo enclosures in southern Britain, so called because of their shape, appear to have been significant also, with finds of Roman military horse harness and equipment indicating a close association with the occupying forces. These enclosures provided security against raiders and predators, and the various layouts appear designed to control livestock movement. And sources of remounts may also have existed north of Hadrian's Wall. It was not, after all, the impenetrable barrier that is sometimes depicted, if you will pardon the pun. The pattern of hill forts and droves northwest of the wall suggests organised systems of livestock rearing and movement that existed long before the arrival of the Romans. A hierarchy of livestock production, from small mixed farms to large ranches, saw animals collected and distributed to large centres where the tribal wealth could be amassed. Now, one sure example of a horse breeding centre was in Northamptonshire, where Iron Age horse breeding on the first of the River Nene may have prompted Roman occupation of the site and founding of an imperial stud, or saltus. And it was, if anyone watched Digging for Britain last night, it was a rather nice coincidence to see Irchester covered quite a lot, and it made me think a bit, and I'll come back to that later. So this horse breeding would have been under the direction of a strator consularis, such as Anicius Saturninus, whose name appears on an Irchester inscription. The roads were built linking Irchester eastwards to Ermine Street, and then southwards to join the network of roads extending from London. And the settlement, founded in the 1st century AD, appeared to prosper. The horse remains from Irchester include one of 12 hands high and another of 14 hands, and of slender build, which was found in the extramural settlement. The slender-framed 14 hands horse was not typical of the native breeds of Britain, for example, this Exmoor pony. Now, imagine a scenario in which this horse was imported to improve bloodlines. The Urchester strator running the salters would have arranged import, perhaps communicating with a strator at Dover, such as Aulus Cornelius Candidus, who dedicated this altar there. He might have cast his net wider. Spanish horses, common ancestors of Dartmoor ponies and modern Iberian horses, may have been imported through Exeter and moved north along the Fosse Way. So here we have 3 roles identified for a strator: breeding, procurement, and import, and a network of stratores across Britain collaborating with the unit commanders, trainers, other government officials, and local breeders would have maintained the resupply of horses to the military. Now, what was noted on the Digging for Britain programme last night was that the Roman town declined in the 5th century AD, and I wonder whether its economy may have been very dependent on Rome's imperial administrative system, possibly through the horse breeding that they did there. I'm just kind of guessing that. Anyway, right. And interestingly, one of the London Bloomberg tablets from around the AD 80s to 90s refers to a location named Epicuria in the canton of the Iceni. The combination of epo, from Celtic for horse, and curia, a court, ward, assembly, or the centre of a pagus, a country district or community, the combination is unusual, and it might suggest a horse trading centre. But if so, where did the horses traded there come from? Revisiting the map of neonatal sites suggests that any horse breeding in the territory of the Iceni would have been conducted in its western reaches, close to the links with Ermine-Street. The region at the heart of Iceni territory does not show signs of major horse-related activity. Furthermore, finds of Iron Age coins that depict ridden horses are noticeably absent from the Iceni region, so horse breeding may not have been a traditional occupation, but a later introduction, possibly taking advantage of newly acquired imperial land following the Boudiccan revolt. Now, admittedly, this is all a little tenuous, but it does illustrate how examination of the equine impact on an environment can open up some interesting lines of inquiry. Now, whatever their military role, Roman cavalry horses had to be tough, sure-footed, resilient, and thrifty, able to sustain long, hard periods of work with limited opportunities for grazing, which on the northern frontier was often of the poorest sort. It took an expert, experienced eye to spot the right candidates. Military horses were selected in an equine probatio by an experienced horseman such as Aurelius Sidus Magdae, who was described in a papyrus record of the 20th Palmyrene cohort at Dura Europos in Syria as being on duty as an equine probatio. He would have inspected the horses, perhaps looking first at the feet, following advice given by the ancient Greek writer Xenophon in the 4th century BC. And you'll be hearing a lot more about Xenophon. He's very influential. He stated that no matter how good the rest of the horse was, a war horse with back feet was useless. And the roster of the 20th Palmyrene cohort from AD 251 includes descriptions of horses, noting their appearance, ages, and distinguishing marks, and the cavalrymen they were allocated to. It also describes where the horses were branded, no doubt the equine equivalent of a soldier's military mark. After selection, the horses had to be trained. And basic training is not a process that can be hurried, and much depends on the temperament and abilities of each horse. It is likely the raw young horses acquired by the stratores would have been started using methods advocated by Xenophon. And the long reining technique, shown on the tombstone of Aelius Bassus and on many other cavalry tombstones, is still used today. Now, at Backington in Warwickshire, a Roman fort known as the Lunt may have been a horse training centre. Its location, close to the junction of Fosse Way with Watling Street, would have facilitated province-wide receipt and dispatch of horses. And for example, a problem-free journey from the Lunt to Carlisle or Stanwix via Roxeter, Chester and Manchester would take around 12 days. The local terrain also allowed training over hilly and uneven ground, as recommended by both Xenophon in the 4th century BC and the Roman writer Vegetius in the 5th century AD. And this consistency in advice is telling in itself. The Lunt contains a distinctive circular structure known as the gyrus, a term used by the Virgil poet writing in the 1st century BC, and he used it for the place where a young horse began his training. It has been translated as circuit, hence the name given to the structure at the Lunt. It is a major feature within the fort, and at 36 metres across, it is much larger than the 20-metre diameter round pens that are generally used for training horses today. The distinctive layout of the fort suggests handling of animals that are not tame or trained, as elements of the fort layout are reminiscent of the Iron Age earthworks associated with livestock assembly, the barrack blocks forming a run towards the double-gated entry of the gyrus. However, most of the fort plan follows a typical pattern, and the gyrus may have been a later addition, with the perimeter extended to the north to include an open area suitable for picketing horses. However, Virgil's key phrase in referring to the gyrus is sinueque alterna, meaning alternate turns, and Tacitus too alludes to such manoeuvres. These alternate turns are important for the horse to develop balanced movements, and were advocated by Xenophon in his treatise on horsemanship. The charges and reels of a Roman military riding display, the hippica, described in the 2nd century AD in Arrian's Ars Tactica, relied on the abilities of horse and rider to execute fast, tight turns while the rider threw weapons at specified targets. These require great skill, coordination and cooperation in both horses and riders, and were the result of prolonged intensive training. These exercises would have followed a figure-of-8 pattern with extended ovals, such as that carved on the tombstone of Quintus Gavius Frontinus, a horse guard centurion in Caesarea Mauretania, and this dates from the turn of the 2nd century. His role was to train the mounted element of the Mauretanian governor's bodyguard, using methods advocated 600 years before, and many of which are still in use today. This shape allowed practice of the tight turns at each end, bursts of speed along the extended sides, and some form of engagement in the centre where the ovals meet. Now, even in the light of this discussion on the terminology for the structure, after all, we don't actually know what the Romans called it, this large space at the Lunt would have allowed some basic training of horses within a controlled environment. And it is possible that by the end of their basic training, this space enabled the introduction of some tactical manoeuvres before the horses were dispatched to their new units. Now, if anyone has not seen the Digging for Britain programme about the 2017 Hadrian's Cavalry project, a joint venture by local museums, trusts and organisations, then do take a look and you'll get a taste of some of the work that would have been involved. And this link that I've got on the screen here, together with links to a couple of shorter films on the Hadrian's Wall YouTube channel, I'll add to the chat at the end of the talk. Now, if urgent, the total time taken to replace a horse, from sending word by fast relay horse and rider to the training centre at the Lunt, to receiving the new horse back at the unit, might have been as little as 11 days. It's likely, though, that such urgency outside of conflict was unusual, and transit times geared to the horses arriving in good condition would have been longer. Stanford University's geospatial network model of the Roman world, which is an extremely useful website, I recommend it to anyone interested in Roman transport or movement. This site estimates the movement by horse at 35 miles or 56 kilometres per day, which is quite a fast pace. And in estimating that, they may well be looking at the cursus publicus, or publicus cursus. I get confused as to which way around it is. Anyway, but in the case we're looking at here, as the horses may have been accompanied by people on foot, and the horses had to arrive in good condition, the time taken to move from High Cross or Vonones to the northern frontier is likely to be closer to 11 days or so. And a journey of several days would require rest points along the way. And the roads of Roman Britain were well served with mansiones, the roadside rest stops where people and animals were accommodated. and mutationes, the staging posts where horses were changed, such as the one found recently close to the A417 in Gloucestershire. A Romano-British settlement at Scotch Corner offered paddocks and other accommodation close to a junction on Deer Street around the turn of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Finds of melon beads, horse gear and hipper sandals offer glimpses of elegant riding horses and working drafts alike accommodated at the site. Later, it was superseded by the facilities at Catterick, and there the structural evidence suggests stabling. Horse teeth found at Catterick show no signs of bit wear, and other bones show no pathological indications for what the animals were used for. Now, the lack of bit wear doesn't necessarily mean that they did not wear bitted bridles, but it might indicate that the horses were untrained or newly trained, and therefore young, making either a breeding centre or a staging post of horses on their way to military units, both possible options. And the location close to Deer Street would facilitate the distribution of the stock to the northern frontier. On arrival at their unit, the horses would have been inspected to assess their condition. One of the Vindolanda letters refers to an inspection of what might be a bond concerning horses, or an inspection of the horses themselves by a man named Octatus. And another Vindolanda letter indicates that he was a brachiarius, which is usually translated as maltster. And this implies a role connected with brewing beer. And the term comes from brachi or brachis, a type of grain, although its actual meaning is uncertain. This raises a question: why would a maltster be inspecting horses? Perhaps a brachiarius was just someone who prepared barley. The Romans routinely fed barley to their horses, but barley should always be rolled or crushed first and never fed whole unless it's been well boiled. And the Romans knew this. Xenophon advised on the problems associated with feeding barley, particularly in excess. If Octatus had a role in feeding Vindolanda's horses, perhaps he had wider responsibilities, such as inspecting them on arrival or after arduous work, and so he'd have assessed their condition and supplemented their diet accordingly. The training of the horses would have continued at the fort with their allotted riders, and this would possibly have been in an all-weather exercise hall, such as that built at Netherby by the first Aeolian cohort of Spaniards. This structure was completed in AD 222, but the inscription suggests the building had been started a long time before that, and it's possible it may have been used as an uncovered training area in the intervening period. And we might note that Netherby's location in the Eske Valley and its designation in the Antonine itinerary as a Castra Exploratorum indicates the route along the valley into the uplands north of Hadrian's Wall was still being used for surveillance in the 3rd century AD. Now, the cost of troopers' horses was deducted from their pay, and their own lives might even depend on them, so ensuring their mount's well-being was vital to both horse and rider. Xenophon's advice to horsemen to monitor their horses closely was echoed 3 centuries later in the 1937 British Army Manual of Horsemastership. And it's worth emphasising the importance of being a good horsemaster should be impressed on every mounted soldier. He should be taught to look upon his horse as his best friend, to study it, to take pride in its appearance, and to look after its wants before his own. The horse's natural surroundings are open pastures, not enclosed yards and buildings, so clean stables and yards are essential to equine health. The horses of a congeneri alae could produce over 7,000 litres of urine and nearly 15,000 kilos of manure daily. The urine pits, which are found in the front rooms of the barracks at Wallsend and South Shields, are diagnostic of stable barracks, and they allowed urine to drain away. But dung had to be removed daily, and such quantities suggest that, wherever possible, the horses would have been kept mostly outdoors. Now, I may be pressing a point home here, possibly even pushing against an open door, but it's worth remembering that whatever changes human society has gone through in the last 2,500 years, the needs of the horse have changed little. And this applies particularly to their daily care. and I suggest the stable management routines of a Roman mounted unit may not have differed greatly from that of a modern one. And I also suggest that the photo on the left here gives a reason why horse rugs might not often survive in the archaeological record. Anyway. Now, for veterinary care, the Roman military horses were looked after firstly by their own troopers and grooms, but when serious illness or injury struck, they were cared for by veterinary staff who were responsible for all types of military animals. But the equine specialist was the mule medicus. And specialist texts were written on equine care for horses, mules, and donkeys, all of which were used by the Roman military across the empire. There was even, these include, falling over my word. The works written included works by Columella, Apsyrtus, Pelagonius, and Vegetius, and there was even a Mula Medica Chironus, written by Chiron Centaurus, which I suspect was a pseudonym. A veterinarius is mentioned in 2 Vindolanda tablets. One letter included a request for a veterinary instrument, a forfex, a tool that's rather hard to define and has been attributed uses from cutting the mane at one end of a horse to gelding it at the other. And veterinary practice is difficult to verify archaeologically. Many of the tools they used were similar to medical instruments, which are themselves hard to identify with certainty, being similar sometimes to both cooking and cosmetic utensils. This tombstone of Mula Medicus shows him carrying a hipposandal, a mark of his trade. And the purpose of hipposandals is debated, with opinions offered including veterinary use or a means to hobbling a horse to prevent its movement. These functions are not mutually exclusive. Limiting horse movement during healing is often required when treating injuries. And 4 hipposandals, tied as 2 pairs, possibly indicating they were used on only 2 hooves at a time, were found at Vindolanda in 2018. However, the presence of studs on some hipposandals found in Austria do suggest they may have been worn to provide additional traction on steep or slippery slopes. And heat-fitted nailed-on horseshoes were developed by the Celts and known in Britain in the 1st century AD, but they appear not to have been widely used. However, being made of iron, it's likely they were recycled, so survival in the archaeological record is unlikely, and a true estimate of the extent of their use cannot be determined. And while we're on the subject of hooves, foot health is critical for horses. After all, a war horse with bad feet is no war horse at all. And the Romans did understand the importance of keeping hooves clean and dry. And the veterinary writer Pelagonius recommended plank flooring, kept clear of damp and dung, while Xenophon recommended cobbled areas for strengthening hooves. And the cobbled surfaces in and around forts, such as in Area B, Context 49 at Vindolanda, or the Bowness and Solway, might indicate holding areas for horses. The length of service of Roman military horses varied. Horse remains found at the battlefield site at Crefeld indicate ages from 2 to 20 years. The teeth of a small horse from Chesters, shown here, indicates it was around 20 years old when it died. And of the 19 horses listed on the 20th Palmyrian cohort's roster, 5 had served for 6 years. Yet another 5 had served less than 1 year, indicating they were remounts that had replaced sudden, significant losses. This situation is also reflected in one of the Carlisle ink-written tablets relating to issues of wheat and barley rations to the decurions of the hour. And it was inevitable that even with good diet and an active life, some would, like their human commilitones, they'd have succumbed to injury or disease. And even the toughest horse will grow weary under a sustained load. And riding a tired horse into battle risks the lives of both horse and rider. And on Trajan's column, cavalry are only shown mounted when scouting or engaged directly with the enemy. At other times, they're shown standing beside or marching by their horses. And the British Army of the early 20th century advised similar practices for cavalry on the march. The lack of horse bones at Roman military sites may be due to careful selection and good care of military horses, thus minimising disease and injury. Many were perhaps sold after their military usefulness was over but still with some working life left. But combat losses were most likely left where they fell, or, as at Crefeld Gallop, buried close to the battle site, sometimes with great care. Periods of conflict might have seen higher equine casualty numbers in the forts, as wounded horses returned from operations, and dating of horse bones found at Vindolanda in 2005 to 2006 might reflect this. The graph here possibly reflects uprising in the AD 160s, the Severn campaign in AD 208 to 211, and the barbarian conspiracy of AD 387. But it also strongly highlights a possible conflict in the AD 240s, perhaps connected with the 3rd century crisis on the continent. On the other hand, the numbers may simply reflect increased populations rather than increased death rates. And so we come full circle. The demands placed on is considerable, as I've emphasised, even though their stocky build made them strong for their size. Eventually, age, injury, disease, and wounds would all take their toll. And we come full circle, and the stratores are called on to supply remounts. These were drawn from horses already in training, who in turn were replaced by horses selected and sent for training. The total lead time for replacing losses included initial selection and procurement, journey time to the training location, the basic training, and journey time to its unit where training continued. Replacing a well-trained horse could take in excess of a year, even longer if it was sourced from outside Britain. So at many times, in many places, an equerry waited for his new mount, perhaps wondering whether it would ever match his last. How well would it carry him into, and more importantly, out of danger? And so we can come to some conclusions. To summarise, the study of the horse populations across the Tyne-Solway Isthmus in the 2nd century AD demonstrates how they might have influenced unit locations, the land itself playing its part in determining where they thrived. With horses acting as force multipliers, they enhanced the response and reach of Roman authority. Their speed over distance meant either fewer troops were needed to control an area, or greater control could be exercised. Considering location and terrain, a tentative distinction can be made between the horses of the alae, who had to cover long distances at speed, hinting at lean, slender-framed horses, such as the Earchester horse, and those of the cohortes equitatae, for whom a small, rugged horse capable of scaling fags would be more appropriate. Much was demanded of these small horses, in roles we would normally associate with larger ones. However, the fact that the average height increased only by 50 millimetres, or half a hand, during the Roman period in Britain, suggests that, as far as the ever-pragmatic Roman military were concerned, they were already fit for purpose. The horse-breeding areas of the Iron Age now supplied the Roman military through the stratores, who kept a steady supply of horses to the military and drew on their contacts to meet surges in demand. The horse-breeding locations close to major roads facilitated the transfer of young horses to a possible training centre facility at the Lunt, and then beyond to units across Roman Britain. Each unit would have needed someone experienced in horses to inspect new arrivals and assess their condition. And given the importance of diet to horse health and condition, and the importance of barley, a barley specialist, Brachiarius, was well placed to oversee the task. And while in some forts examples of exercise have been identified, many units may have used unenclosed to train their horses using a figure-of-8 circuit. The horse meant different things to different people. The Roman military authorities, they were essential assets that enabled them to meet their task. For the troopers, they were four-legged comilitenes, for whom they shared bonds of comradeship and danger. For officials and breeders, they were goods to be traded. Farmers may have viewed them as competition for the land they'd farmed for generations, or as lucrative new stock that could be sold or presented as taxes to the local provincial government. Any research on Roman military horses sheds light on these underestimated yet critical contributors to the military effort on the northern frontier of Britain. And what we learn here may further our understanding of life on other Roman frontiers. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Susan. That was
Yes,
absolutely fantastic. But
yes,
then,
I haven't quite filled the time I thought I would. I think I was talking a little fast, which is my usual. But I'm happy to answer questions.
no, it was absolutely fine. Right. I have the first email through. Oh goodness, I suspect we're going to have quite a few.
Splendid.
I have a few myself, which if Rob hadn't sent me an email through already, I was going to use, but that'll have to wait.
Oh, fire away,
There's
fire
an
away. Let's see if it
observation
comes.
here rather than the question to start with.
Okay. Yeah.
This is from Sarah Whitley Kinzett. That Market Harborough apparently has an area along the high street that used to be used as a remount centre between the Fossway and she termed it the Via Divana. That's the road that runs supposedly up to Leicester. Well, it does run to Leicester.
Okay.
It does not go to Chester. Hence, for those who don't know, it's an antiquarian name that was given to this road. But we have absolutely no evidence it ever went to Chester. That's just my
Right.
rant.
Okay.
So, but the
Ah,
important thing is that apparently there was this area in Market Harborough. I wasn't aware of it.
okay. Excellent. Another reason to visit Market Harborough, aside from the splendid cavalry helmet that they have now in the museum.
Do
Right.
they?
I've made a note of that. So
Okay.
yes. Thank you.
From Rob, I assume that's our own Rob. Was the range and speed of horse troops limited by the lack of stirrups and horseshoes, such as are available today?
I when it comes to stirrups, the shape of the saddle gave a lot of stability to the rider on the horse. So I don't think that would have been a limiting factor. The feet possibly, as I say, we don't really know how much the horseshoes were used. It's they were known, but we there's not much evidence of them. And as Xenophon said, I mean, the emphasis was on you need your war horse to have good feet. It's the first thing that's looked at. So I think they would have relied more on the conformation of the horse for that. And obviously, there's a lot of barefoot horse riding today where the hoof care is through trimming
Hmm.
rather than
Yeah,
using horses. But it depends very much on the horse. There are some horses that just do not get along well barefoot, and they do need to be shod. So it was another criteria for selection, I think.
there are also some horses. I used to have one, a fell pony, Dale's pony, strictly speaking, um, whose was so hard there was virtually no point in shoeing him at
Hmm.
all.
Yeah,
Unless you were riding him a lot on the road or driving him on the road as I did for long
yeah,
distances. Just was no point whatsoever.
no,
And he was
no,
absolutely fine, but he was unusual, I have to say.
yes, yeah.
The
But
issue
there
of
are
shoes
benefits, and
the issue of shoes is an interesting one. I am aware of a few scraps of evidence from the East as to early horseshoes, but I'm not aware of any evidence from this country unless you know something I don't.
I'll send you a couple of references.
Please do. It must be relatively
Yes.
recent and I've missed it
Let's have
somehow.
a look. I've actually got the references written in my let's see if it's feet. Uh,
I
I
suspect there
think it
might
was
be
a
one or
chap,
two
somebody
other
called
members of the.
Ellis. I know Anne Hyland referred to it in her book on Roman horses. And I have another reference. Which reminds me, I was going to put the links for the YouTube video and the BBC program into the chat if people want to copy them.
I'm
I
sure they
can.
will. I'm sure they
I'm
will.
sure. Let's have a look. Let's see if I can. Oh, hang on. Shall I stop sharing as well? I'll try to do that. There we go. That might be helpful. Right, in chat. Let me just find my. Um, here we go. Copy these. Uh, right. Okay. That should be there now. If anyone wants to copy that to view those later.
That's excellent.
Anyway,
Thank
sorry,
you.
back to the questions. I digress.
Well, there's a related one, and it comes to this issue of whether horses were shod or not. We certainly have evidence of the use of unshod horses in Doncaster. The prints are there for everybody to see, and the area to the side we usually call the shoulder to the next to the metal road. But Rob was also asking, would you expect horses without horseshoes to use metalled roads or likely metalled or unmetalled tracks alongside? Which I've sort
Um,
of half answered.
it would probably it would a depend on the horse and how far they were going, and I imagine the verge on the side. But I mean, if Xenophon is actually recommending standing horses on cobbled surfaces to strengthen the hoof, and without a horseshoe, the hoof is much more flexible, and so they may have a better grip on certain surfaces rather than others. So I think it's a bit of a cop out, but it depends how far you're going, what the terrain is like. And what your horse itself is like, what you know his feet are going to be like.
Possibly the speed that you're going as well. If you're a
And the
draft
speed,
horse at the
yes.
walk, it's a different thing to a cavalry horse at a gallop.
Well, yes, that would not be on the road. That could get a bit tricky.
Question from Paul Wood. What sort of numbers would need to be in use to maintain the needs of the cavalry in Britain? And it's a two-part question, so I'll just stop at that one and then come to the second half.
Well, I looked at the number of horses that might be present across the northern frontier, and that was around 4,007 to 800. Um, I didn't look at the whole of Britain, so I don't have off the top of my head the number that would be required across the whole of Britain. But I imagine that they would have been concentrated more in the north because I think that's more where some of the more contentious areas were. In the south, where things are perhaps a little more stable, you wouldn't have needed the same
Mhm.
presence. Um,
Does that 4,800 include horses that were too young to yet be used, or horses in training?
right. I imagine the most of the breeding would have been further south. There was a writer who did suggest that there might be some breeding along the northern frontier, but I kind of feel you wouldn't be breeding horses in an area where they were at additional risk. You
Yeah,
would keep your young stock, your breeding stock further south where they would be at less risk.
that makes sense. The which possibly feeds into the second part of the question. Would the gyrus necessarily be within a fort, as a number of Welsh forts have similar sized crop mark enclosures to the Lunt, I think he means, such as Hindwell and Cesters, within their immediate environments. He doesn't think any of those have been excavated, but they look very similar. I don't know if you know anything about those. I certainly don't.
No, I'm not very familiar with those. I actually think the training areas would have been probably outside the forts, although there has been suggestions that I think the drill hall at Netherby is kind of in front. The idea is that perhaps there's a basilica in front of the Principia in a fort, that sometimes these drill halls that were within the fort were used for the training horses. It's I would lean towards them being outside, training areas being outside, simply
Hmm,
because that would offer more scope for what you can actually do with a large number of
indeed.
horses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I tried to
Okay.
find
I'm
out
just
how
going
big the
through Rob's
Netherby
email.
one
This
was, but
the second email, and I'd have to concur with everybody. So they're all saying basically the same thing. John Barry, Paul Wood, John Lonergan, Simon H, and Derek Zacer. So Derek, presumably, rather than his computer. Um, yeah, they're all saying how fantastic and interesting it was. So just passing that on now.
that's very kind.
We
Thank you
don't
very
usually get
much.
those
Thank you.
comments until right at the very end, so you've got them now. So that's a first. Um,
Splendid. Thank you. That's very
from
kind.
Penny, did the Romans have vets for many animals? So other than horses, I assume she's asking.
Right. Well, veterinary medicine wasn't really established until fairly late, I think, in the Roman period, because a lot of Roman medicine generally has its kind of foundation in kind of the agricultural caring for animals, either by the owner or the let's say the master of the farm, and that applied to people as well as horses. It wasn't until later, sort of, a lot of these texts that I spoke about were more written in the fourth century or after. So there weren't specific. The veterinarians looked after most animals, and then the mula medicus focused more on the equines. But it was a yeah, Roman medicine was a kind of quite an amorphous thing for quite a long time, with sort of animals and humans being treated just roughly the same. That doesn't really answer the question terribly well, does it? I hope that's clear enough, because it wasn't clear until later.
From Peter Robinson. Peter, I'm thinking of, he is from Doncaster area. I think there is evidence of horse breeding between Doncaster and Castleford stroke Pontefract. Have you looked at this area at all?
I haven't looked at that area because not yet anyway. There's lots of little things that are going to be on the back burner for a while. My main focus for my MA dissertation was purely the northern frontier between sort of the Solway and the Tyne, sort of Wallsend and South Shields. I was looking at that particular area. I haven't looked. I went a bit further south, but no, I haven't looked at Doncaster yet. But it's on my list now. So thank you.
And from Graham Stubbs, um, who is congratulating you on using his drawing of the Lunt. And thanks for the
Oh,
acknowledgement.
yes.
The question,
I
why
hope I gave it credit. I should have given it credit. I usually try to.
why has the alae based at Benwell Fort not been included in the talk? Question mark.
Mm. I think it probably got included in my dissertation, but I didn't look at it particularly in the fort. The Benwell. Yes, I think it's included in the strip along the bottom, the slides along the bottom, but I didn't discuss it particularly. No, hands up. No, I didn't. No.
You
Is
couldn't.
there anything he'd like to?
If you want to expand on that, Graham, please do,
Yeah.
and Rob will pass it on to me. In
Yes,
the meantime,
anything which I can't answer today, I'm quite happy to take them take the question away, look at it, and then come back if anyone wants me to come
okay,
back with a particular answer.
we're getting comments coming in as well. From HP, wow, can there be a part two, please?
Yeah, yes, I have, and once my PhD is done and out of the way, because at the moment that's getting the my full priority, but I have a number of little projects on the back burner, one of which is hippo sandals, looking purely at hippo sandals.
Oh, at last.
Um, yeah,
Good.
yeah. So so it's there's a museum in Tuxford called the Museum of the Horse, and
Mm.
it's run by a marvelous lady called Sally Mitchell, and she very kindly let me see some of her collection of hippo sandals, and I was able to take measurements and photographs. And this is something that, say, once the PhD is out of the way, this is something I want to follow up. So yeah, there will be a part two.
Excellent. We will look forward to that in a few years' time. From Paul Kobe, did cavalry troopers have remounts, a second horse, in addition to their principal horse?
Right. Now the each eques, an ordinary trooper would have one horse. A sesquiplicarius or a diplicarius would have two, and a decurion had three. So there was, I think remounts generally were held sort of perhaps more centrally within a unit, but they were, according to Pseudo-Hyginus, there was a very definite allocation. Decurions had three, the sesquiplicarius and diplicarius each had two, and each of the troopers had one, who
I'm
he loved and cherished and looked after, because it might save his life.
I'm so embarrassed that I hadn't switched my phone off. I do apologise to
I,
everybody
do you
for
know
that.
what? Didn't hear it. I was too busy. I was too busy yapping, so I didn't notice.
Well, I'm sure everybody else heard the cursing when it happened. Anyway, um, apologies for that. It's on silent now. From Philip Bevan, were there, as far as we can tell, any horse units like the English Civil War dragoons, i.e., where troops use sturdy horses to go forward and then dismount for action? You touched on the idea of that, I think, at one point.
Yeah, I mean, it was thought that uh, the cohorts equitatæ, that they were mounted infantry, but n not really. The evidence suggests that they were all cavalry. But basically, when you're in a firefight, you do what you have to do. I don't know if there were specific ones that were specifically trained for that form of action. There were later on variations. You had the heavy armored cavalry, the cataphracts, who they would not have missed. They would not have dismounted because they'd never have got back up again. But there was also a slightly different type of cavalryman who used a heavy lance called a contus, and that was a slight variation on the cavalry format. But again, cavalry, not kind of mounted infantry. As far as I'm aware, I'm always open to learning new and finding new stuff and revising. But as far as I'm aware, no.
Well, we're learning all the time, so
Yeah. Mm.
who knows how things will have changed in another 30, 40 years. Delwyn Matthews, could the absence of any neonatal horse remains shown in the distribution map be due to the nature of the more acidic soils in this area? There would undoubtedly have been auxiliary cavalry units operating throughout Devon and Cornwall. Is that the area
Yeah.
he's meaning? I assume he's referring specifically to that area. He's from down.
Yes. I mean, that's bound to have an impact. And I'll be honest and say I haven't looked at the Southwest at all when it comes to cavalry. It's not an area I've looked at. However, one for the back burner. It's that's something I could look at in time. But yes, he's absolutely right. Obviously soil conditions. But I think when they're talking about when I've quoted instances where a high proportion have been sort of evident, it's a high proportion of the fauna remains that have survived. So the it would still tell
Mm.
us something. If nothing survived, then nothing survived. However, you're looking at proportions of what has survived.
Yeah, but he's talking about neonatal horse remains, and as you said, horse breeding is not actually likely to have taken place in the areas that the cavalry were stationed anyway. On the
I wouldn't have thought so. They'd have kept them back. Mm.
and you've got more congratulations here from various people: Paul Kobe, Hugo Harris Smith, and J.
Thank you.
David Morgan, and Jill. No surname. Still
Thank
got
you
three
all.
more emails, so you thought about calling them now for
Somebody's
questions. I
doing my
did
job in the
warn you.
background, typing away frantically, copying and pasting frantically.
From
Yeah,
Jan
if you want to send
Scott.
me copies, yeah, I mean, yeah. If anyone wants a particular answer, I say, just let me know, and
We'll work through them
and
as
I'll
long
get
as you're not
yeah.
pressed for time. We go on usually and just until we finish.
Yeah.
Jan Scott, were the cavalry units based in York? I assume she works at Roman Aldeburgh. She says we often get asked by visitors um, why no soldiers seem to be based there. Of course, Aldeburgh isn't actually a fort; it's a civitas camp,
Uh,
town.
well, there was a sixth legion at York, wasn't there?
At York
And
itself, yes.
they would have had the Equites Legionis, who would have been their own cavalry, um, probably doing scouting and courier type roles. But I can't think off the top of my head of an auxiliary cohort of cavalry there. Um, but
Um,
there were certainly sort of cavalry cohorts in Yorkshire. So, but not necessarily York.
yeah, I can't think of any, and the fort's fairly close to Aldeburgh.
Mm.
But I'll have a think about that one and get back to you, Jan.
Mm.
From Lancelot Robson, the Selgovae were well-known horsemen, and many still are. Just an observation, I think.
All right, okay, noted.
I think he's probably including
Have
himself, perhaps.
Yes, I'm sorry for any omission. No offense intended. I'll seek to rectify that for the next talk.
um, right, so that's a thank you from Penny for answering her question. From Chester, has any calculation been made of how many acres would be required to maintain a unit like the Ala Petriana at Stanwix, including the horse, grieve, cavalryman, etc.?
I have indeed done that as part of my master's. I didn't add it in today, but yes, I can certainly. In fact, give me a moment. I can probably dig it out. The large green, so the large green circles represent the amount of. Uh, just give me a moment. I can probably find the figure, or I can get back to Chester later with that. I'm just flipping through my old thesis here.
If you can't find it, don't worry. We
If I
can
can't find it,
we can pass it on to
I
Chester
will.
later. But
Yes, I'll email you later, Chester.
yes, I'm going to say you've got his details anyway, haven't you?
Yeah,
Um, where are
it
we?
would have been a lot anyway. It would have been.
Oh, sorry. I'm laughing. It's the wonders of autocorrect, which says, "Have you found evidence of other squids rather than equids, um, i.e., donkeys, asses? Hard to tell the difference from horses, I strongly suspect." That's from HP.
Right. Now, the thing with donkeys and mules is that they are not really suited to the damp climate of Britain. They
Yeah.
don't thrive so well. And I think they would have in this country, whereas elsewhere they might have used the mules and the donkeys. I think in this country they probably would have used. This is why you get these small horses, these little horses of 12 hands, quite often coming up because I think they would have been pack horses that might have been used instead of the donkeys and the mules because they really don't thrive. They are hot weather animals, really, or hot climate animals.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's
to see if
pretty
that
much
answers.
accepted that mules probably weren't used here, isn't it? Um, from John Lucas, any evidence for Roman cavalry using palfreys to carry arms or armor? I've always thought it would make sense for troopers to walk along the metal part of roads, leading their mounts, who would walk along the verge between the metal surface and the drainage ditches. However, in order to reduce fatigue and speed up reaction times in case of emergency, palfreys would seem to be a logical solution. I've often wondered if native pony breeds were used for this purpose.
It's
Quite a long
entirely
question.
possible. A unit, yes, a unit on the move. They may well have used pack horses. I think though, because I think a lot of the movement would have been patrolling type movement, um, where they'd have carried a minimum with them. I would have thought. This is because a lot of the information I'm looking at is through archaeology is looking at things like Trajan's column, the column of Marcus Aurelius, and other sort of gravestones, tombstones, that kind of thing, to try and get a feel for what the appearance of the horses and their kit would have been. You don't often see them loaded up in that way. But it's a good. We have talked about pack horses, and pack horses would have been yes, if they had to go out on a long range patrol, they probably would have taken, I would expect would have taken common sense says that they would have perhaps taken another pack animal. But as for evidence, I don't know.
Peter Robinson's come back. I should explain Peter Robinson's from Doncaster Museum, which is why I
Oh,
know who he is.
okay.
Um, and you'll see when we know each other shortly in the question. He just wants to say it would be good to connect with you on LinkedIn if you use it. And then he'll discuss Doncaster with you at whatever point suits.
That'd be great. Yes, thank you. I'm
Uh,
not
and
actually on LinkedIn, but yes, perhaps I should be.
then the next
But
question is
thank you.
actually to the second part of the question is to me. Sorry about that. He's very interested in the comment I made about the horse prints from Doncaster. Were these from the recent work that we did at Berg Wallace, which is unpublished, so most people won't know about.
Mm.
Peter, no, it wasn't from Berg Wallace. It's actually close to Wentbridge, and it was an excavation that the Pontefract Archaeology Society did many years ago. But I can get some details, what little details I've got of that. But it was the Pontefract Society who
Okay.
did it. They weren't horseshoe prints; they were hoof prints, so no
Oof.
sign whatsoever of any shoes.
Right. Okay. That's
As far
interesting.
as I was told, I've only
Yeah.
seen photographs and not very good ones at that.
Right. Okay. Yes. We want perhaps some kind of hoof prints like those dinosaur hoof prints that were on Digging for Britain last night. We want-
They were definitely horse hoof prints. There's no issues with that whatsoever. But it was a, and usually you get the verge by the side is sand or lightly metalled, but in this particular case, it was clay.
Mm.
Hence the prints have remained.
Excellent.
Yeah. Uh, from Philip Bevan. Good grief, we've still got loads. Um, outside your area, but just wondered if any evidence had emerged of organised dog units used for battle.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a short answer to that. I haven't come across any. The only evidence of dogs that you see in the forts is usually when they put their paw prints into the tiles that are being baked. I haven't.
Yes.
Um, I've seen the idea mooted, but I haven't seen any evidence of it yet. But admittedly, I haven't been looking for it. So
No.
yeah,
It's
it's
ringing a bell that there is a classical reference to it, but it's just a vague bell at the
mm,
back of my mind. But
yeah, it's
sorry,
it's
Philip,
not
we
really
haven't
it
got
isn't
a lot
really
of
my
detail.
area. Mm.
From Graham Stobbs has come back. Just wondered why it wasn't considered in the map of roads leading out of forts as a road leading north from the front of the fort, heading ultimately to join the modern Great North Road, was discovered recently excavation. Yes, it was. Um, can't add personally too much to that in terms of the road network.
No. Which road is he talking about?
From
The
Benwell,
Benmore. Ah, no. Right. Mm. I need to do some more
the
digging
idea
then.
of a road heading north from that area is an old one, but once apart from what has recently been discovered immediately north of the fort, or just north of the fort, I don't think there's any evidence of it going very far. It's a bit of an oddity. It didn't. I
No, I
think
mean there are other roads, aren't there? There are other
John
roads
Poulter's
heading
theory is it
north.
was never finished,
Mm,
but I think I'll have to communicate with you privately about that, Graham, when I've done a bit of
mm,
digging.
mm.
Peter Robinson's also saying that they have quite a few hippo sandals from Rossington Bridge and Berg Wallace, which
Okay,
are,
I've noted.
and he's also adding that there's evidence of horse breeding between Doncaster and Castleford Pontefract. I think that got mentioned already.
Oh yes,
Um,
yes.
pro ah, right. From Nancy McQueen, can you please explain the hippo sandals again?
All right, okay. The most hippo sandals that you see are generally have like a flat sole. There might be a slight ridging in them, and they have very high kind of curving um, bit at the back, and another bit that loops around, supposedly the front of
So,
the hoof.
sorry,
And
Sue,
the
your bandwidth is a bit poor.
oh, is it?
You just
Sorry.
dropped out again. Can you just
Okay.
repeat what you've said? Because
All right. Okay. Hippo sandals are largely flat with perhaps just a slight ridging on them. And there's some discussion as to whether they were actually worn routinely or whether they were just used for veterinary use or for hobbling. The veterinary use and the hobbling can go hand in hand to limit horse movement while they're healing if they have to be, say, on what we'd call box rest today. In Vindolanda, there were four hippocantals found, but tied together in two pairs, which might indicate that they were intended to be used separately, so just on two hooves at a time. However, what I finished with saying was that there have been hippo sandals found in Austria. They've got studs on the base, and this rather suggests that they were used possibly for traction, which indicates perhaps a horse moving. I think one of the arguments with hippo sandals is looking at the way they rise up at the back and at the front, they would inhibit a horse would not be able to move comfortably while wearing them, which is why it's thought they might be used for hobbling the horses because it restricts their movement. And also have these chunks of metal. If horses are brushing, they might knock themselves if they're as they walk. That one hoof brushes another. If it's wearing a big chunk of metal on it, wrapped around it, it could cause some injury.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
they're very impractical, but they do need study because they're extremely practical. I don't think they were worn routinely. But then you have these hippo sandals appearing that do have studs on the base, and
Mm.
you think, why would they have studs on the base if they're not meant? Are they meant for horses? Are they meant for mules? Are they meant for oxen?
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
We
yeah,
don't know, but
needs teasing out.
in the archaeological record, they're, they're they're almost ubiquitous. They're everywhere.
Mm,
There
there are
really
lots
are
of, yeah,
vast numbers of the things, which suggests that they were in common use for whatever that use was.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Especially if you consider being iron, they would perhaps be normally be recycled. So why are they surviving if there's something that could normally be recycled? So it's
Peter Robinson did mention about Berg Wallace. I do know that one of them that was found there, it's just in the middle of a field, very well away from the fort and the road north. Maybe it just fell off.
mm,
We've all lost horseshoes in the middle of
yeah,
fields. Anybody
that's
with
right.
working horses knows that only too well.
Even when the things are nailed on, they still come off.
From Kathy, are there notable correlations between known Roman stud farms and places with the field named Blackland? Sorry, that's actually from Colin Hill, and I think Kathy must be his wife.
Lackland. I'm missing the connection.
I've not come
Mm,
across any suggestion of this connection
I
before.
haven't come across that.
No, Colin, could you email me with more detail there, and then we can
Mm,
either myself or Susan will get back to you about
yeah,
that.
I'd have a look at it. Yes, it's not something I've come
No,
across.
well, place name correlations interest me because there
Mm,
certainly are some, but that's not one I've come across.
mm. I seem to recall some time back a lecture on or a presentation on mutationes. There was the idea that Mount Pleasant might have been um, linked with the Mansiones or
Yes, I'm
mutationes.
I'm in the process of writing a paper on that.
How are you? All
Um,
right, okay.
yeah, spoiler
I just remember
alert.
making the point that Mount Pleasant in the Falklands was
Yeah,
probably not
spoiler
a
alert. There
follow.
is no correlation, but it's not quite that simple. There's no
Ah,
direct correlation, but I am writing a paper because it needs to be discussed. There's
yeah,
the
interesting.
issue with cold harbors, which are a similar sort of name. There is a correlation, but actually
Mm.
it's a 17th century one, and
Ah, right.
that's somebody else's work, not mine. Anyway, um, from Penny again, observing there is a dog paw print in a tile in Carlisle. Yeah,
Mhm.
there is. We found one in excavation just outside Aldeburgh. They're pretty common.
Yeah, found
I'm
a few
running
at
through them now.
Bed Oswald as well.
From Sarah Whitley Kinzet again, the Neapolitan dog was bred to tear out enemy cavalry intestines. That could be a
Oh,
Naples breed. It is a long remembered item, she says. That
oh,
could be what's at the back of my mind.
yes. Okay. Yeah, okay. Mm,
Thank you for that, Sarah. If you have a direct reference, classical reference for that
mm,
from one of the sources,
that would
could
be
you possibly
interesting.
send it through to us? Also from Sarah, I have seen thin leather soles held on with straps. I have.
Mm,
I'm not sure if she's meaning from antiquity or modern ones.
right.
I've certainly seen. There are modern ones.
Mm,
There are some that look more like we call it a horse sock,
mm,
which were These had a specific use. They were, whether the ones that Sarah's thinking of are the same, but the more modern ones, 19th century ones, were often used on large estates for
Mm.
horses pulling lawn mowing machinery,
That's right.
so they didn't
Yes.
damage the grass.
Yes.
Um,
There's also, I think, in some marshy areas, because Sally Mitchell, who um, runs the Museum of the Horse, she posts mystery items, horse items, on Facebook sometimes, and one of them just in the last few days was this very heavy leather boot, very flat soled,
mhm.
and she was asking for ideas of what it might have, or people to guess what it was, and also I think in Holland on the beach, Dutch where Dutch horses are used on the beach. These very sort of broad leather kind of socks are kind of used for stopping the horses sinking into the
Yeah,
sand,
yeah.
which is, yeah.
It's why Clydesdales were bred with such wide, broad hooves. Same
Ah,
purpose.
yes.
Those who don't know, my horse interest is heavy horse, so
All
I'm not
right.
going to bore everyone with it though. From Kathy, apparently blackland is often associated with manuring. Um,
Right. Okay.
maybe that's the possible link. Not come across it. No, we probably shouldn't have mentioned Mount Pleasant. Paul Wood. I constantly come across Mount Pleasant, Cold Harbour, and Blacklands at Welsh Roman sites.
Okay.
Um, that's possibly true. I don't want to go into too much detail because this isn't my talk. It's Susan's, but Mount Pleasant
Far
is
away because
actually
I'm
an
not familiar.
extremely common name. So yes, you
Mm,
will get some at Roman sites, but I've plotted the distribution of every single one in the country, and I can tell you there is no correlation.
mm.
Um, there might be local ones, though. As a general principle, there doesn't seem to be one, but I'd be very interested to know more about the Roman sites. I'll have a closer look at that. So thanks for that, Paul. Still coming. I think these are the last two.
Okay.
Um, one is a comment and a congratulations, really, from Stephen Mullins. Thank you for the informative presentation. Good luck with your PhD. And sorry he has to go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Philip Bevan again. Again, a thank you. He thinks both the cavalry and the navy are aspects of the Roman military which must have been so important, but largely not considered in general histories. And he's quite right.
He's absolutely right. Another one of my little pots on the back burner is Roman military amphibious ops. There is
Oh,
a
wow.
paper waiting to be written there, not about navy, but amphibious ops, sneaking up rivers and
Yeah.
in little boats. They did that a lot, and it's not really, you don't often see it covered, but yes, that's
No.
if someone wants to beat me to that one, that's fine. But because I'm not really a ships or boats person, but there's definitely material there.
No, I suspect that you won't be beaten to it, but you never know. I'm not going to do it anyway, so don't worry about that.
Uh,
I've got
there's,
enough
there's
to do.
certainly plenty of classical references, and there's a lot of work being done on boats. So yeah.
Hmm. From Vicky, and this is a very good question. Did Romans in Britain eat horse meat?
I don't know. Um, I think we'd need to look at bones. It doesn't jump into my mind that there's been evidence of butchering marks on horses, except something is now beginning to ring a tiny bell somewhere. But then you don't know, are they butchering it for human consumption or for to feed the dogs, or I don't know. Um, I wouldn't like to
No,
come down to
like you,
either way on that one.
I've not come
Mm.
across it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it
I
didn't.
think there were so many different peoples within the Roman military, coming from all different societies with different cultures and different dietary habits that I don't think you could say for sure that they would not have eaten horse meat, as a blanket no. But I just don't know. I haven't seen enough. A good question.
It's a very good question, and I think that's it. We've got. I'm not going to read them all out because there are so many congratulations. It was an
Oh,
absolutely
it's very kind. Thank you.
fascinating
Yeah,
talk.
I'm glad people enjoyed it. I think it was a thoroughly enjoyable subject to study and one which I want to give more attention. You'll be hearing more from me on Roman cavalry. But I have to get this PhD thing out of the way. Do that, which partly involves cavalry, but not enough.
No, but it's. I think what it highlights how such an important, as the one of the comments we've just read out, it highlights that such an important element of the Roman military, indeed in just the Roman world full stop, is so overlooked and not really considered. Um,
Yeah.
as a lot of the audience would already know, that one of my bugbears is any bit of metalwork that turns up that people can't attribute a use to becomes part of a horse harness.
Hmm.
And so many of them aren't, and yet the actual way that harness was used in different parts of the empire varied enormously. It's not really been studied very well. Just saying, somebody else ought to
My
do a
beer.
PhD on that. um, PhD on horse harness in the late Iron Age in Roman Britain, that'd be a good one.
Mm, mm, indeed. Yes. Yeah. It'll happen in time.
No, let's hope so. And I think that's it.
Okay.
It's
Well,
a,
thank you
it's
for
a
all the great questions. I really enjoyed answering them and talking about this. It's been great fun. So thank you for asking me.
well, as usual, the Q&A has gone on for almost the same length of the talk, which is quite
Oh,
normal.
just as
We we
well.
have
Mm.
we have a fantastic audience, and I need to thank you, of course, Susan, for a brilliant talk. But I want to thank the audience as well because we've had a lot of questions and some
You're
very
great.
intelligent ones tonight. We usually do, but tonight's been exceptional. So thank you very much.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
And
Thank you, everyone.
yeah, I don't know
Thanks,
if you
Mike.
were watching the numbers at the bottom, but at the peak, I think you managed 252.
Oh, wow. Goodness me.
And during the talk, you only lost three, which is pretty good.
Yes, I'm chuffed to bits with that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah,
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks, Mike, and
no,
thanks for all the great questions
you're more than
and
welcome.
yeah, the kind words. That's great.
We have gone on a little longer. I'm going to wish everybody a good night now, and thank you again. Very quickly, I've just got to bring my other screen up because just bear with me 1 second. Here we go. Just to remind everybody who's still there, in 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks today, we have Dr. Chris Locke here, who's going to be talking to us about the geophysics work that the group that he doesn't exactly run it, but he's the expert in, if you like, from the Community Archaeology Geophysics group in St Albans. So his talk is mapping Verulamium, and some of the recent work over the last few years that they've done there, particularly with ground penetrating radar, is absolutely stunning. So that will be a good one. I think you've already
Interested in that.
seen some of that, haven't you, at the conference in Newcastle last year, Susan? But yeah, it's good. So if you haven't booked, you've still got a fortnight. So that's that. And then it just remains to me to thank our team, which tonight, apart from myself, was Rob and Jeff. So thanks, guys. And that's just about it. And thank you
Yeah.
again, Susan. I
Oh,
really enjoyed it.
thank you. Oh,
Uh,
that's great. Yeah, brilliant.
we normally, as you know, we'll sign off now and close it down. But if
Steve.
you've got 5 minutes, just log in again and we'll have a quick chat afterwards.
Yeah.
If
Okay,
you've got
that's
time.
great. Yeah, see
Okay.
you shortly. See you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.